Hello, everybody. This is Philosophy 60, lecture number 4. Today we'll be engaging the Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle, written approximately 350 BCE referring to before the Christian era, which is year 0 in our Christian calendars. Beginning with the birth of Christ, of course. So I want to begin today by trying to make some kind of at least a very tentative link to the general thematic of excellence. This is continued, this notion of what is excellence or what is virtue. Again, I want to stick to the translation of arete as excellence. And Aristotle will engage this thinking in terms of two types of excellences in book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics, the excellence of intellect and also the excellence of character or of moral character, or the ethic itself, right? What one's behavior, character in the world entails. And we will be going into that a little today. I'm going to basically start scratching the surface with you. The Nicomachean Ethics is divided into 10 books. We're reading books 1 and 2. Book 1 is really setting the frame. It's a prefatory moment in book 1 in terms of the method that will be implied, the Aristotelian method of how to do an investigation, and also thematizes how to go about investigating what is the good and its relationship to happiness and, of course, the soul. So we have this kind of tripart movement happening throughout, which is very much interlinked in the first book of the Nicomachean Ethics. Secondly, in book 2, we will go into the distinction that he makes between the excellence of intellect versus that of the intellect, the excellence of character, again, which is the investigation into the ethic. So we're only reading the first 2 books. Another very, very crucial moment in the second book is the doctrine of the mean, which I will speak about to a degree today, also referring to the text. Anyway, so let's begin. Again, these are lectures, a new form of writing that we're engaging here, very much like Althusser's course on philosophy for non-philosophers. This is addressed to the next generation, and maybe the next generation, of course, who are going to be citizens and leaders. Nicomachus was Aristotle's son, also the name of his father. So we think it's both an attempt to bring in the values of the grandfather as well as transmit the values to the next generation, to his son. We'll tackle this first of all in terms of how he goes about dealing with method. And again, these are lectures to be read as such, unlike the Platonic dialogue, which is much more of a conversation. These are lectures, again, and these are the notes of his students that have remained extant and keep us in touch with all of this. So I'm going to go through sections. As mentioned in the class this week, Aristotle begins with this telos. What is the goal, the ambition, the objective of an inquiry? Telos, T-E-L-O-S. We'll go back and forth to that word. It means also the end and the limit of an inquiry. So we have a circumscribed area here of what does it mean to have the good society and how will we go about that in terms of, analyzing what that means. So he begins there, and he also will speak about, ends and actions, the difference between just having an objective, right, in a way, that some are activities and then some become products outside of that, of the activities. And this again is in section 1 of book 1 as an introductory or as a prefatory remark to the actual investigation of what is the good. Secondly of all, we want to talk about, what are the capacities, the most highly esteemed faculties and disciplines that we should privilege? For Aristotle, these are strategy, economics, rhetoric. And, for him, again, as mentioned, politics is the master science. It is always politics that oversees everything because it ordains and legislates what we're to do. And I think I gave the example of how much of your education is predicated on the administered world, now a group of administrators who are telling the faculty what to do, how many people should be in a class, et cetera. There's very little conversation going on between administrators and faculty in terms of what is best for the students, what are the best conditions for learning. So this is something that was really lost, but it is part of the political moment. And again, to read our contemporary situation through the lens of the political and the political space, or in Aristotle's context, the polis and the body politic is very important. So we will talk about that actively. He also wants to, again, be precise in these limits and these telos and how to go about the student should, should engage these matters, subject matters, as we go along. And this is in section 3, the engagement of subject matter. So I again emphasize that this is something that we should read very carefully and take into account. What is the engagement of the student? And do we work from the rational principles forward, right? This is a very important part. How do we predicate our investigations on reason? So for him, he's going to begin the first 3 sections, 1 through 3, is prefatory, right? Again, as I mentioned, the preface comes from the Latin word or the notion of preface, to say beforehand, or a prefiguring of what is to come about the good. So he mentions in section 4, what is the good? Let us assume our inquiry and state in the view of the fact that all knowledge and choice aims at some good. And then we say political science aims at and what is the highest of all goods that is achievable by action. Again, he returns to, in number 4, to that of the notion of politics as a master science. Verbally, there's very general agreement for both the general run of men and people of superior refinement say that it is happiness, the good, right? Living well and faring well with being happy. But with regard to what happiness is, they differ, and the many do not give the same account as the wise. So he's already separating here that some people think happiness is basically living well and faring well, having means and using those means to live well. But there is some difference between the wise and their approach to this, as well as the many. So again, I want us to keep this in mind. We would read this section very carefully. I know I mentioned Hesiod as one of the thinkers that Aristotle refers back to, because he says that not everybody hears, not everybody is participating in happiness. And he cites Hesiod from Works and Days, a text written probably in the 8th century, 7th or 8th century BCE, by the thinker of the everyday, Hesiod. Far best is he who knows all things himself. Good, he that hearkens when men counsel right. But he who neither knows nor lays to heart another's wisdom is a useless wight. This is very, very important quote that he uses here, because one must listen to the wise. And again, as Socrates mentions in the 3 working definitions throughout the Meno, excellence is knowledge, excellence is justice, and excellence is also that of wisdom, wisdom being the highest form. So the imparting of wisdom, at least in the ancient philosophy, is a very high level. And as mentioned in the first week of this course, Sophia literally means wisdom. The sophos is a promoter of wisdom, right? And through argumentation, not always for the truth, but for to act the wisest. And we will, once again go back to this lover and friend to wisdom as one working definition of a philosopher. Althusser is not on that same page. He does not take up this ancient view. This is taken up by another school of philosophy in the 20th century, that philosophy should, in terms of being faithful to the classical and the texts of antiquity, should still search for wisdom at this point. Of course, we have to ask that question: what does it mean to be wise, and how does that translate into praxis or into action, of course? Okay, so we'll go on. We look at the point of the points and where to go forward. Aristotle proceeds by rehearsing all the earlier arguments of the good, and he really wants to go beyond form. And if we turn to section 6, and this is in the Greek text, section 6, lines 1096. What in the world do they mean by a thing itself, if in a man himself and a particular man, the account of man is one and the same? For insofar as they are men, they will in no respect differ, and if this is so, neither will there be a difference insofar as they are good. But again, it will not be good any the more for being eternal, since that which lasts long is no whiter than that which perishes in a day. The Pythagoreans seem to give a more plausible account of the good when they place the one in the column of the goods, and it is that Sulpicius seems to have followed. This is very interesting. Let us discuss these matters elsewhere. An objection to what is said might be discerned in the fact that the Platonists have not been speaking about all goods, and that the goods that are pursued and loved for themselves are called good by reference to a single form of the good, while those which tend to produce or preserve these somehow or to prevent their contraries are called so by reference to these and in a different sense. Clearly, then, goods must be spoken of in two ways, right? Two ways. Some must be good in themselves, in essence, right? The others by reason of these. Let us separate, then, goods in themselves from things useful and consider whether the former are called good by reference to a single idea. So again, he is taking on Plato the single idea of ta agathon, is the Greek word, agathon, the agathon, of which is the highest form of all, the one form to which everything moves towards. And he wants to show how this has to be accounted for in terms of, how we're going to go about thinking through a new good, a new good that will be what we'll come up with in this investigation. So he returns to this, enough of these topics, and he does have the famous songs, the phrase, "We are friends of the forms, but greater friends to the truth." And again, Aristotle is really saying that the forms that Plato is speaking to, which I will definitely go over in class and show this diagrammatically, the forms in themselves, or the form itself of the good, is not enough. We have to go beyond this. So in number 7, he talks about happiness in the complete life and what happiness really is. And you will see this working throughout sections 6, 7, 8 in particular, right? What is most commonly said about the good and happiness. And again, you see how he operates. He'll take thinking from the past and he will try to unfold it very nicely to fit in terms of how we, the Aristotelians, the school of Aristotle, the Lycée in this case, the Lyceum, how it will go beyond thinking about the good as what happened before. Okay, so one crucial section again, 1098b in the text. We must demand the main task may not be subordinated to minor questions, nor must we demand the cause in all matters alike. It is enough in some cases that the fact be well established, as in the case of the first principles. And again, Aristotle does not want to move towards principles. He wants to begin with a principle. The fact is a primary thing, or first principles. Now, of first principles, we see some by induction and others by perception, some that come from argument, some from active perceiving, and some by a certain habituation. And in some ways, these principles also, habituation can be taken to mean at one level, not all levels, but certainly at one level is analogous some way to Gramscian common sense and common stock, as in, or common philosophical stock in Althusser's course. Okay, but each set of principles we must try to investigate in the natural way, and we must take pains to determine them correctly, since they will have a great influence on what follows. For the beginning is thought to be more than half of the whole, and many of the questions we asked are cleared up by it. So the beginning actually sets the framework always. How do we begin? I remember I spoke to you in terms of philosophy. One of its great contributions to the history of the systems of thought is that philosophy enables us to ask questions properly. We may not find the exact answer, but at least we're able to frame the question properly, to go about the investigation the right way. And in Aristotle's case, he's really trying to do this throughout. So this is sort of one of the lessons we'll draw from the Nicomachean ethics as we go on. Okay, so section 8, very important, right? Consider all of this, right? The questions in the light not only of our conclusion and our premises, but also of what is commonly said about it. For with a true view, all facts harmonize, but with the false ones, they will clash. So now goods have been divided into 3 classes. You have the external goods, others as relating to the soul or to the body, and those that we call those that relate to soul must be properly and truly goods. But we are positing actions and activities related to soul, so our account must be sound, at least according to this view, an old one and agreed upon by philosophers. It is correct also that we identify the end with certain actions and activities, for thus it falls among the goods of the soul and not among external goods. So he's beginning to position that this is very much a contingent upon and predicated upon a notion of the soul. And we have to begin to think of happiness in relationship to the psyche. And in some ways we could say today that the notion of soul today could be our psychic well-being. And I know the term eudaimonia, eudaimonia, was a concept brought up in the class. Our well-being, that's what happiness becomes in a sense. So we want to talk about excellence in terms of harmony, versus that of dissonance, and disharmony. And then the question is also posed, the reason is happiness, and this is 1099-1, whether happiness can be acquired by learning, or is it by habituation, or by some other kind of training. So all of this becomes very crucial for Aristotle as we go forward. How do we, acquire happiness? Now, if there's any gift of the gods to men, and remember, right, this is something that Socrates speaks of at the end of the Meno. Aristotle goes back to this. If there's any gift of the gods to men, it is reasonable that happiness should be God-given, and most surely God-given of all human things, inasmuch as it is the best, right? So the gift of the gods to men, happiness itself, the greatest. But this question would be perhaps more appropriate to another inquiry. Happiness seems, however, if it's not God's sense, but comes as a result. And this is very important. Again, this is lines 1099, sections 10 through 15, a very crucial paragraph in section 9 of book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics. I emphasize this is a very crucial passage to read on what is happiness and how does it work. Very, very crucial and important to understand. So please read that carefully, right? Okay, so this question would be appropriate. Happiness seems, however, is not God's sense, but comes as a result of excellence in some process of learning or training to be among the most godlike things. For that which is the prize and end of excellence, seems to be the best thing and something godlike and blessed. It will be also in this view be very generally shared for all who are not maimed as regards excellence may win it by a certain kind of study and care. And again, the care of study. I like this phrase very much, that when you study, to be very careful. Try to be slow and careful. I know we've talked about this often this semester. Taking it slow is really a mandate for our time. We are so speeded up, we are so fast to accumulate knowledge, we don't take it slow. And therefore, in terms of that lack of slowness, we do not take care of the actual investigation, what we're really trying to do. So I recommend this section 9 very actively, etc. And then he goes on to who is considered happy in the end. And he goes on, he mentions a figure in Greek thought, Solon. He says, must not one at all then be happy while he lives, which means, as Solon says, see the end. Is it true that a man is happy when he's dead? Or is this quite absurd, right? If we say happiness is an activity. But we do not call the dead man happy, and if Solon does not mean that, how can we safely call a man blessed as being at last beyond evils and misfortunes? This becomes a matter for discussion. So we want to, again, speak about this. What is happiness in terms of the living, and then looking back on one's life. Very, very important to engage at this level. Okay. Again, section 13 of book 1, another very important section. This is 1102, lines 5 through 25. Since happiness is an activity, and this becomes, again, a definition of happiness, happiness is an activity of soul in accordance with complete excellence. This is enough for us to work with as we go forward. Happiness is an activity of soul, of psyche, in accordance with complete excellence. We must consider then the nature of excellence. Perhaps then we would be able to see better the nature of happiness. And this is where he's going to go in the next book in terms of the separation of intellectual excellence from moral excellence. Okay, then Aristotle in this 13, before closing out the first full lecture, book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, he will begin to talk about the soul, the rational part of the soul, and then the irrational part. And this is important to remember because unlike Plato, who has a tripart division of the soul, which is the appetitive soul, our world of our desires, the seat of our wants and desires, and then secondly, the spiritual part of the soul, the second level, and the third level, of course, is the intellectual or the soul of rational thinking, the rational part of the soul. For Aristotle, he reduces this to twofold. The soul is both rational and irrational, and he'll go into this very, very important, right? Irrational element, one sense in the irrational shares in the rational principle, and a part of their soul has reason that it urges a right and towards the best object. But there's also found another natural element which is beyond reason. So he'll speak about the twofoldness, right, on page, again, in section 11, 103, actually 4, in section 13 of the first book. And we will go a little bit deeper into this and also talk again about the differences in the conception of the soul by the two major philosophers of the ancient world, Plato and Aristotle. Okay, book 2. He begins book 2 with this difference between excellence and intellectual and moral excellence, or what I would call ethical excellence. Intellectual owes its birth and its growth to teaching, and it requires then experience and time. Whereas moral excellence comes about as a result of habit, whence its name is also formed by a slight variation for the word from habit, which is basically that of ethos. Ethos is from which we get the word environment, right? So he begins that distinction here and talking about then the distinction between theoretical knowledge, intellectual inquiry only, and then practical knowledge. And again, I'll put a new term on the board, phronesis, right? Practical reason, phronesis, 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 practical reason, right? Is Aristotle versus that of theoria, right? Theoria, which is basically intellectual reason, and the world of sight. The other one is the world of activity, although theory can have a phronesis with it and a praxis as well. And we'll speak to this as how that works. Certainly it works in Gramsci that way and in Althusser. All right, so the other thing, what excellence is, this is section 5. Since things are found in the soul of 3 kinds, the passions, the faculties, and the states, excellence must be of one of these. By passions, appetite, anger, fear, confidence, envy, joy, love, hatred, longing, emulation, pity, and in general, feelings accompanied by pleasure and pain, right? So section 5, very, very interesting to read. And in general, the feelings that are accompanied by pleasure and play, the things in excellence of which we are said to be capable of feeling, right? States in virtue to which we stand well or badly in relation to the passions, right? So he goes on to make these distinctions, right? Excellence is in respect to its type, right? So this is very important, this section 5 on excellence. Again, to read, because this can be compared somewhat and thought of parallel to Plato's Meno and what's involved in that regard. All right, so the other aspect in excellence as a choice, this goes on in section 6, continues in that. And then he goes on to looking at these moments, right? Choice and also means relative to us. And this begins to open up the question and of what is the mean and what is the type of dispositions that lead to the doctrine of the mean. And this is, again, another very crucial thematic in Aristotle's ethics, dispositions leading to a doctrine of the mean. The dispositions, 2 other extreme, excess and deficiency. And what the idea is to find the means, right, in between, right? One is an excellence, that is, we find the excellence by coming to the middle, finding the middle between an excess on the one hand, an abundance of things on the one hand, versus that the deficiency or a poverty of things on the other. And how do we come to the middle ground? And how do we ultimately find that mean in between? And he goes through many of the passions, such as courage, such as, happiness, rashness to courage, prodigality, to liberality, the etc., how the mean is opposed, how this works. So please read again, and I emphasize this, sections 7, 8, and 9, especially at the end of book 2, and we will discuss the doctrine of the mean and how it works and its political effect in the world, and how does this contribute to not only the political space or as part of the master science politics and what is involved here, but also at the same time, how this helps one's, quote, moral character, if you will, or more one's ethic in the world. How do we work this through? So we will talk about dispositions and passions. So I'm going to leave it at that for the Nicomachean ethics. We'll continue and we'll go back and forth. I would like you to see Aristotle inquiry as very different from Platonic dialogue and questioning, very different than Socratic questioning. We will emphasize this. Very different in the way that Althusser uses vernacular and uses the everyday to make his point and then goes back to the history of philosophy, and certainly much different than Gramsci's notion of the motivation to study philosophy and its role in shaping the world. So we will continue with that. Thank you. And the next lecture will be again on Althusser and abstraction and philosophical abstraction. So this ends lecture number 4, or intervention number 4, with Aristotle and Nicomachean ethics. Of course, we could go on and on and on and spend many, many days and nights on just the first 2 books of the Nicomachean Ethics. But again, let me summarize. Book 1 is really about how do we go about it in investigation? How do we begin to define what excellence is and its relationship to the good, as well as what is happiness in its relationship to good? How do we determine this? And then ultimately, what is the soul, and what is the soul made of? De anima, as the Latins translated, psyche, as the Greeks had it. And then the second book, of course, trying to figure out what constitutes ethical behavior, what constitutes an ethical character in the world, and how does one go about measuring this through the doctrine of the mean. Okay, so I look forward to continuing the discussion here on the Nicomachean ethics. So thank you, and see you soon. Bye-bye.